Chapter 10, Energy Balance, Weight Control, and Eating Disorders, Screencast 4. Historically, weight for height tables have been the primary way used to determine healthy weight. Now, it's really important to realize that there are a lot of weaknesses with this type of a measure. Keep in mind, when we talk about weight alone, it does not talk about weight distribution. It does not talk about the differences between lean mass versus fat mass. So there's really a lot missing here. And also, historically, if you go back to where height weight tables originally were based upon, they were based upon the Metropolitan Insurance Company and individuals that actually bought life insurance. So right there is a significant bias on how those height weight tables were actually created. But now the real focus is to look at the distribution of weight and look at the various components. And now what we're really looking at here is total body fat, where is that fat located, and then also weight-related medical problems. Now, the current replacement for height weight tables is body mass index. And once again, this really is just an updated version of weight for height standards. And to keep in mind, the only real thing that it has going for it is convenient, and also that it applies equally for males and females. Here are the formulas for body mass index, and this is not something that you're responsible for calculating. I want to make sure that you're comfortable with that. Now, something you do want to have an idea about for the exam is going to be relative ideas of what a good body mass index or a poor body mass index is. So when we look at a body mass index less than 18.5, that is considered to be underweight. From 18.5 to less than 25 is considered to be healthy weight. 25 to less than 30 is overweight, and there are starting to see some health risks associated with individuals that have a body mass index between 25 and less than 39. Now, greater than 30, that is actually considered to be obese. Now, it is important to keep in mind that body mass index is not appropriate for everyone. It does not apply to children, teens, older adults, and women that are either pregnant or lactating. So body mass index should not be used with those specific populations. Now, ideally, what we want to be looking at is body fat content. And once again, this is not something that I'm going to ask you to memorize, but you may want to be considered of the values that are considered to be obese. So if we look at desirable percentage body fat in males, it's going to be anywhere from 8% to 24%. Anything over 24% will be considered obese. Women, it's going to be 21% to 35%, and over 35% is considered obese for women. Now, notice that there is a significant difference in the range between males and females, and this is due to the fact that women require more body fat for reproductive function. Now, here we're basically looking at some general examples of body shape with respect to BMI. And notice BMI of 25, that is borderline. If we look at BMI of 20, that is considered to be desirable. And anything over 30 is considered to be obese. And we can actually see that in this particular series of images for the most part. Now, to measure body fat content, you're going to need both body weight and body volume. And there are a number of ways to actually measure body volume. One is going to be underwater weighing. This used to be the standard and was based on water displacement. And there were a number of mathematical formulas that were used to account for differences in densities of fat and lean tissue. But one of the issues with this method is the assumption that lean mass is consistent across the lifespan. And we know that's not the case. So there's some really significant error that's built in with the formulas that are used to calculate percentage body fat via underwater weighing. Another method is known as air displacement using the bod pod, and this basically is the amount of space that a person will take up in a chamber, and that is actually measured. So a pretty decent measure of body volume. Here we actually see the two different processes. We actually see in the panel on the left underwater weighing, and notice this can be rather uncomfortable and difficult for a number of people. Now, on the right, we actually have the bod pod, and this probably would be an issue for individuals that have claustrophobia or something along those lines. Now, probably a standard type of estimate of body fat that you may be familiar with is skin fold thickness. And this is when calipers are used to measure the layer of fat or subcutaneous fat underneath the skin. Keep in mind that in well-trained hands, this is a relatively good measure. Now, another type of measure is going to be bioelectrical impedance. This is when a low-energy electrical current is sent through the body. Now, keep in mind this is a painless process. It is a tool that can actually estimate body fat in less than 5 minutes, and it's ultimately based on the fact that fat resists the flow of electricity because it is low in electrolytes and water. The degree of resistance to electrical flow is used to estimate body fatness. The greater the resistance, that indicates there is a greater amount of adipose tissue. Here we basically look at the skin folds and bioelectrical impedance. And one of the things that is an issue with skin fold measurements is you do not get an idea of fat that is not subcutaneous, so intramuscular fat, and we know that that is actually a thing. Now, the gold standard is going to be what we refer to as a DEXA scan, and DEXA stands for dual energy X-ray absorptiometry. This is the most accurate method and what we consider to be the gold standard. And what it does, it measures body fat by releasing these very small doses of radiation through the body to assess body fat and bone density. This is usually a technique that is used to determine if someone has osteoporosis or not. Now, generally, when there's a whole body scan, that will estimate body fat, fat-free soft tissue, and also bone mineral content. So this is considered to be the gold standard. Now, another way is to get an idea of how body fat is distributed. And basically, if we look at upper body, and that is known as android obesity, or if we look at males, the apple. Okay? And the reason why this upper body or abdominal obesity, it's been shown to have a correlation with cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, and type 2 diabetes. It's found in males, and that's due to the high blood testosterone, diets that have a high glycemic load, individuals that have a high level of alcohol intake, and smokers. And this is actually going to be assessed simply by measuring waist. So it's a very, very simple measure. If you have a waist measure that's greater than 40 inches in males, that's considered to be upper body obesity. And for females, it's actually going to be greater than 35 inches. Now, when we look at estrogen and progesterone, those are hormones that actually encourage storage of fat in the lower body as opposed to the upper body. So this results in a smaller abdomen, but larger buttocks and thighs. Now, after menopause, estrogen levels fall, and this actually encourages abdominal fat distribution in women. Now, here we're basically looking at a number of conditions, okay, that have issue with obesity. Being obese is going to increase surgical risk. It increases the risk of pulmonary disease and sleep disorders such as sleep apnea. We look at type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, bone and joint disorders. Now, this is going to include gout, an increased risk for gallstones, skin disorders, various types of cancers such as kidney, gallbladder, colon, and rectum. For the most part, also uterine cancer in women and prostate cancer in men. Individuals that are of a shorter stature, in some cases, impact on pregnancy risk, reduced physical agility, and increased risk of accidents and falls, menstrual irregularities and infertility, vision problems, but you get the idea. There are a lot of health conditions that are related to obesity in some way, and it is important to keep in mind that obesity is considered to be a disease and not a health condition. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're looking at how diseases are classified, and obesity does fall under that category now, and it always didn't. Now, here we're basically looking at differences in upper and lower body fat distribution. And historically, this has been called the apple versus the pear. And so here you look at the abdominal or upper body fat distribution, male, whereas with the female, once again, you have the lower body, and that is associated with less risk. Now, there are a number of factors that will impact body weight and composition. And when we look at genetics, it is a very big role. Children with no obese parents have a 10% chance of becoming obese. If the child has one obese parent, this risk increases to 40%. And if both parents are obese, the risk of that child being obese soars up to 80%. Now, a lot of this has been done with identical twins when they are raised apart, and they, even though they have not been raised together, so different homes, different patterns, all of that, they show similar weight gain patterns. And so when we talk about genes, they account for 40 to 70% of weight differences. And this is due to body type, metabolic rate, and factors that affect hunger and satiety. There is something known as a thrifty metabolism, and this also is something that could be inherited. And what this means is these are individuals that use energy very frugally. It sounds like efficiency, but here the issue is they are not expending a lot of energy, and they actually store fat more readily. Now, there's also something known as set point theory, and this is the theory that says genetically predetermined body weight or fat content that is closely regulated. When energy intake is reduced, thyroid hormone secretions fall, slowing metabolism. When weight is lost, body becomes more efficient at storing fat, and this may actually also help prevent weight gain. And so once again, you may have heard of yo-yo dieting and how when individuals lose weight, think of it as starving. The body becomes more efficient with the energy that it has and much more efficient at storing fat, resulting in weight gain. Now, when we look at body weight similarities among family members, some of that can actually be more from learned behaviors. If we think about couples and friends, they behave similarly towards food. And realistically, our gene pool has not changed much over the last 50 years or so, but obesity has drastically increased. And this is where we have to look at the environmental factors. They are going to define when eating is appropriate, what is preferable to eat, and how much is actually consumed. Now, one thing that I have put an emphasis on right now when we look at issues in our society with respect to overweight and obesity, a really big part of that is just too many calories, okay? And also portion size. Okay, learning to restrict portion size, that's going to be a really important skill in helping to manage weight. Now, here, this is basically some additional factors that play a role in fat storage. If we look at aging, adults tend to gain weight as they age, and this is due to a decrease in basal metabolism. And at the same time, we tend to become increasingly more sedentary and less active as we get older. When we look at biological females, women naturally have greater fat stores than men. Women may not lose all weight that's gained during pregnancy. At menopause, there is a shift, and all of a sudden, you're probably going to see a abdominal fat deposition in women. And remember, typically we see the gynoid or lower body fat deposition. High-calorie diet, we know that's a real issue. That's excess energy intake. It could be things such as binge eating, a personal preference for high-energy foods, and also other foods that favor weight gain. Sedentary lifestyle, we do know that if you're not active, that is decreasing the amount of calorie expenditure, and that will favor weight gain. If we look at weight history, overweight children and teens have a greater risk of being overweight as adults. Then if we look at a number of social, cultural, and behavioral factors, if we look at lower socioeconomic status, learned food preferences, overweight friends and family, a cultural ethnic group that prefers higher body weight, a lifestyle that discourages healthy meals and adequate exercise, easy availability of inexpensive high-calorie food, excessive television viewing or video game playing, smoking cessation, lack of adequate sleep, emotional stress, a greater number of meals that are eaten away from home, so restaurants and out, that also are linked with an increase in fat storage. There are a number of medications that actually will have an impact. Some can actually stimulate appetite, and that results in an increase in food intake with the potential for increased weight. Now, geographic location, that also can be something. Think about regional differences such as high-fat diets and sedentary lifestyles in the Midwest and areas of the South. We really know that that leads to different rates of obesity in different places. And then genetic characteristics. These impact basal metabolism, the thermic effect of food, adaptive thermogenesis, how efficient the body is at storing body fat, the relative proportion of fat versus carbohydrate that's used by the body, and possibly increased hunger sensations that are linked to the activity of a number of brain chemicals. So those all tend to be genetic in nature. Now, when we look at nature versus nurture, it is important to realize that both play a role. Even with a genetic predisposition for leanness, it is still possible to gain fat. And you can say the opposite. Individuals that have a genetic predisposition to obesity can avoid this with a healthy diet and regular physical activity. There is a table of factors that encourage excess body fat storage and obesity, and we looked at that previously. Now, body weight and fatness can also be affected by diseases, hormonal abnormalities, genetic disorders, and psychological disturbances. Limited fat stores can be created by conditions such as Marfan syndrome, anorexia nervosa, AIDS, hyperthyroidism, and some cancers, whereas obesity can be due to brain tumors, ovarian cysts, hypothyroidism, and Prader-Willi syndrome.